Hi, folks. Like Mark said, I am the manager at Durham Garden Center, have been for the last 3 years. I did not expect to go back into retail horticulture when I went to graduate school. For public horticulture, I even subbed out advanced retail garden center management class for community planning. But I get to help plan my community through curating Durham Garden Center by selecting. Anytime I make an order, I try and answer that prescription that Mark mentioned. You know, that perfect plant that never gets, too big, grows, perfectly, super, super green all year long, or orange, or purple, or whatever it is that the garden needs. I try and bring that in. And then we also try and educate people what not to put in the garden. These plants that maybe they're US natives, but they're from the West Coast. If you are from the West Coast, welcome to the East Coast. It's a whole different story. We can grow plants from the East Coasts of other continents better than we can grow plants from the West Coast of our continent. So just keep that in mind when people say, plant natives for whatever benefit. As Ashley pointed out, make sure you know where it's native to. If you come to Durham, I highly recommend it. We are just 30 minutes away. Visit Duke Gardens while you're there. Come to the garden center. We don't look like much from the front, but if you come inside, you'll see that we are ready for plants people of both beginning nature, houseplant parents, but also seasoned gardeners. And we're happy to see you. We are in zone 7B, hardiness zone. Who is from farther north? And from farther south? Okay, well, you found yourself in a sweet spot. Zone 7B, we can zone push in both directions, which is a lot of fun for those of us from the south, where the range of conifers that we can grow for winter interest is eastern red cedar and longleaf pine, and loblolly. Those three, that's it. But vacationing up in the mountains, I sort of fell in love with mountain landscapes, fresh water, exposed rocks, topography. Where I'm from, in Beaufort, South Carolina, the highest hill is a sand dune, which doesn't grow many plants, turns out. A couple of tips. To make it worth your drive to Durham, we offer 20% off your total purchase for J.C. Ralston Arboretum members. It's my way of giving back to what was basically my backyard when I was in undergrad. I actually lived across the street just off Blue Ridge Road for about 3 years. And we would frequent the Arboretum at least once a week. It was great on snow days when nobody's on the roads, because nobody down here can drive in snow, whether they think they can or not. We could just walk over here and see this garden in its splendor. So I do recommend visiting the garden regularly. The first time I stepped foot in the Arboretum, it was midwinter, and the Prunus mumes were in bloom. These are the Japanese flowering almond or apricot. Apricot, thank you. Fantastic collection here. I have not found a source to stock good Prunus mume. So if you know of one, please let me know. And visit garden centers often. If you're looking in your yard and you don't see color or you don't see form, take a trip to the garden center periodically through the year. Never fill your garden in any one season, because it's going to be disappointing for the other three. We are a 4-season, we can garden in all 4 seasons here, which is why they asked me to talk about gardening in winter. You should get to understand your garden's microclimates. This is where the wind blows, where it doesn't blow, where the sun hits in winter versus summertime. In our area, if you didn't know, in winter, the sun angle is much lower. And so, for example, in a south face, the setting sun in winter can hit all the way to this back wall, whereas in midsummer, almost straight down. I mentioned pushing your hardiness zone. Hardiness zones are basically an average of how cold it gets in an area. We are in zone 7B, as I mentioned. Just to the west of the state is where my mother lives, about 100 miles from the border with Tennessee. And it's mountainous, but it's also zone 7B. So in that garden, I can grow plants that are native to mountaintops. I can also grow them next to cannas and hedychiums, which is a lot of fun. And you'll see pictures from that garden here shortly. At Durham Garden Center, we like to tell people that we are a pay-as-you-want public school for horticulture. We are there to take your money because we need paychecks, but ultimately we're there because there aren't enough good garden centers where people actually care about your success. I should mention that I spent a total of 7 years in 3 different Lowe's garden centers over the period of about 20 years. So I'm not afraid to buy plants. My staff tell me that I buy too many plants. So now we talk about it. But the difference between going to a big box garden center versus going to a locally owned small independent garden center is that we actually care about your success. We care about your garden. We want to see the pictures of your garden. There are plenty of good people working for the big box garden centers, and it was a great place to get my start. But just try your local ones. Go to Big Bloomers Plant Farm. It's worth the drive out. There are lots of good local ones here in the area as well. Don't be afraid to ask for plants. If you've seen it in a magazine, if you remember it from childhood, but haven't seen it for sale forever, it's my job to scour these plant lists from the local growers. And very often, I won't get something in unless I know somebody wants it. So build relationships with your local garden centers, ask for plants. Trade plants with friends, and get dirty. Have fun. So we are going to talk about a little bit of science, a little bit of what to do in midwinter when protecting our plants, planning for what you want to see in the wintertime, celebrating your successes, and why it actually matters to change your mind, move plants around, dig, divide, and just mix textures, colors, tones. Think about fragrance. Think about the pollinators that overwinter as adults. What are they going to eat in your garden? All of that matters. If you didn't know, everybody lives in a hardiness zone. They are 1 at the poles and 13 at the equator. And we are just right there in that sweet spot, right in the middle. We have, on average, our first frost of the year is October 15th, and the last frost is typically April 15th. There is almost always a frost on Easter weekend, whenever it decides to show up on the calendar. So just plan for that. There's a concept called chill hours that you'll want to be aware of. We do not cool off at night here in the Triangle area. So our chill hours versus my garden 100 miles from the Tennessee border, I get a lot more chill hours in Valdez, North Carolina than we get here in the Triangle. That matters for things like fruit production. It matters for when plants are going to think to break out of dormancy. And also, it matters because the way a plant accumulates these hours is like time in a certain temperature range. And I saw graphs drawn by different people about what chill hours matter for what plants. Basically, if it's a plant that grows on a mountaintop, it probably doesn't want to be here, long story short. And if it's a plant that's not from here, it may break out of dormancy too soon and need protection. And we'll go into that more as well. We get freezing rain hail, sleet, as often, if not more often, than we get snow. So if you're not familiar with freezing rain, first lesson, don't plant Bradford pear trees. If you haven't heard about these, they are horrible splitting trees. If you're driving down a road and you see 15 trees that look, half split, you're looking at Bradford pears. And you just want to be aware of that. I have too many plants. I live in Durham, just across the street from the original Duke homestead. So when we're talking about terrible soils and growing in subsoil, my soils have been overworked and grown tobacco for so many years that I don't plant in the ground typically, unless it's something that's like really vigorous, like a weeping willow, or something like a beech tree that I know can grow on horrible subsoil clay. Most of the time I'm potting or I'm planting in raised beds, as was mentioned. This is a picture of me zone pushing. And these are my plants that are either have broken dormancy too soon for the climate, or they are, a half zone or 2 zones, too sensitive for the climate. And I throw them all in our little barn in the backyard for winter protection. If you do something like this, you want to keep in mind that you want to open those barn doors during the day so that you're not cooking your plants and so that you're not pushing them even farther along into the growing season when that Easter frost is still coming. Non-native versus native plants. This is one of my mini Japanese maples that I keep in a pot. It breaks dormancy typically about 2 weeks before it should. Thankfully, with maples, they are capable of reflushing sometimes if they're not too shocked by the wintertime. And if you don't have a barn, or if your Japanese maples are too big, you can buy frost cloths. They increase local temperature by about 5 degrees, so you can wrap your plants in that case. And if you do, the thing to keep in mind is to keep space between that wrapping and the plant material itself. So this is a picture of my garden in Valdez. Down here in the bottomlands is zone 7B. There at the top of the mountain is probably zone 7A. And the thing that I want to point out about this is that if you build your garden, if your garden looks amazing in winter, it's going to look spectacular all the rest of the year. So when you are musing about where you want to put a feature plant or a piece of garden art or whatever, if you look at it in midwinter, you'll see the space that you have available, and you'll see how it can help frame. One of the trees in the back of this image is a flowering cherry tree, weeping flowering cherry tree, that is in flower for about a week and a half out of 52 weeks in the year. So enjoying the brevity of that bloom time is something that we learn when we look into Japanese garden culture. Just because something is not in flower for 12 months out of the year doesn't mean that it can't be spectacular and the thing that steals the show when it is in flower. This is a part of the world where weeping cherry trees actually have seeded in to the woods. So if you drive into the mountains in mid to late March, you'll actually see weeping cherry trees through the forests of Appalachia, which is pretty interesting for about a 20-mile stretch. There in the middle of the water, just here, if you can see, this is a weeping bald cypress. That one is called Cascade Falls. And about 15 years ago, my younger self put on hip waders and walked as far out into the pond as I could, and I put that tree on the mud and staked a piece of rebar through it, which I then removed 5 years later, maybe. And that tree's just sailed through. And that architecture, the fact that it loses its leaves in the wintertime is actually a benefit to that garden, because I can see the structure, I can see that architecture. If you're not familiar yet with the architectural tree walk here at the Arboretum, they have a fantastic Cascade Falls, along with a columnar European Carpinus. Thank you. And I have, over the years, coveted so many of the plants here that I now have many of those same plants in my collection, including that Carpinus. The thing that gardening allows us to do is time travel, which is a lot of fun. Because if you think about buying one of those 40 trees that you need in your life to account for your carbon footprint, the earlier you get that in the ground, the more you can enjoy it. And when you're walking through your garden, some people plan where plants go. I don't understand that. I just arrive with a truckload of plants and walk around at night just thinking, musing. I'll set it down. I may pick it up the next day, may drive home with it. Who knows? But the idea of setting it in the ground and watching this slow motion firework happen over decades is really powerful. And I wonder if we don't stop and think about that enough. And when our customers come in and they ask, well, what should I put here? What should I put there? I don't care. As long as you like it and it's the right plant for your situation, I'll help point out what's available on any given day. But as long as you enjoy it, that's the main thing. We do get freezing temperatures. We do sometimes get snow. You can see here, raised beds. This is my shade garden that I can see from inside of my house. Oftentimes, if we have a wintertime garden, the best place to put it is somewhere that you can look at it from inside. One of the best plants for the winter landscape is the contorted filbert, Harry Lauder's walking stick. It looks like garbage this time of year. Just awful. Beetle-eaten, tired, sad. But in midwinter, when those contorted branches flower their catkins that hang straight down, I can see that architecture again. I can see through it into a pond, and it's spectacular when everything else is leafless. I would be remiss not to talk about bulbs with winter gardening. Bulbs, pansies, and violas. If you grow a tulip, treat it as an annual. Tulips do not want to be here. They never look like the picture on the package because those pictures are taken in the Netherlands, which is a totally different climate. It's a waste of money, honestly, to plant tulips in the Southeast. Plant daffodils instead. You can actually do forensic horticulture, finding the age of old home sites based on what daffodils are still growing in the square around the old home site when you date that daffodil to its date of introduction. So they're really, really long-lived. Plant daffodils. Crocus you can plant, but the squirrels are going to eat them, so beware. If you are at all curious about bulb gardening, Brent and Becky's Bulbs in Gloucester, Virginia is a fantastic resource. It's worth the drive up. They have their entire catalog planted out one by one, so you can walk the catalog, but they also have a fantastic display garden. And if I'm not mistaken, Brent's great-grandfather started the daffodil trade in America. They are a mail-order bulb company. Check out their website. If they say you can grow it, I trust them. One note about pansies and violas, get them in the ground in fall. Do it before the end of December. Don't buy pansies or violas in January. Don't let anybody sell you violas and pansies in January. Get them in the ground, let them get rooted, and they will be spectacular past Mother's Day. Also, there are now viola and pansy crosses called panolas. Those are bred for us, so try them out. So, When plants flower before they leaf out, we call that precocious flowering. This is one of our native redbud trees. This is a really ancient redbud stump, actually, at a local garden center near me. When winter gardening, pay attention to bryophytes, the mosses. They really glow in the winter sunlight. They're at sometimes their best. This is a close-up picture of redbud flowers on ancient bark with moss. That picture, if you had that as a specimen stump in your garden, it would still be worth stopping and taking note. Redbuds, the National Collection of Redbuds is here at the Arboretum. There are now genes named for weeping, architecture, red leaf, yellow leaf, and double flowering. So if you are at all interested in growing native plants, native small trees, or in this case, all of those permutations are going to come through the market because of research here at NC State. Other winter interest to keep in mind: plants that are deciduous but don't drop their leaves. So in this case, this is a Acer pubipalmatum that has a beautiful maroon foliage of dead leaves all winter long against that bright green trunk. It's really spectacular, and I had no idea it was going to do that. It was just a happy accident. But things like beech trees, oftentimes oaks, keep their foliage within what we call the cone of juvenility, which is basically the part of the woody plant that doesn't physiologically age to adulthood. So beeches, in this case, this maple, that with snow on it, even with freezing rain, is really spectacular. Although freezing rain can cause splitting of those V-shaped trunks. Gardening with herbaceous perennials in winter. This is Hinenchicks or sempervivum. They are also called house leeks. They are used to plug roof holes in parts of Europe. In our case here, they thrive in midwinter and basically go dormant in summer, but they're evergreens, so they don't look it, but then you're gonna overwater them because you think they need water and they're not actually taking it up. Other evergreen perennials that we grow very well are hellebores, heucheras, some evergreen ferns, club mosses like selaginella, beautiful evergreen ground covers. Last year, we did not get any snow at all, so evergreen ground covers really sing in our landscapes. When we put them in, evergreen yuccas and agaves for full sun, and evergreen herbs like rosemary, lavender, thyme, and oregano love it in the southeast in a pot. Rosemary in the ground sun. I mentioned that I do a lot of gardening in pots. This is a thunderhead black pine that I have wanted for years and years. So when I got a bonus at work, I bought it in a really expensive pot, and I spent a lot of money on really good potting mix. If you're gonna do any plant in a pot for years and years, you wanna make sure that your potting mix doesn't have pictures of annuals on the front. Those are intended that you're gonna put them in a basket, grow your annuals for one season, and then toss the whole thing in a compost bin or just in the garbage. I like Happy Frog brand potting mix personally. So I put about $100 worth of potting mix in that pot for my pine tree. Over on the right here, just because it is an evergreen doesn't mean it's green. This is a selection of Japanese holly. Any basketball fans? Gosh, they're gonna shoot me. Basketball fans in the audience? Okay. One of our very fine customers is Coach K, formerly of Duke basketball, and he loves himself some colorful evergreen shrubs. So we have what we call the Coach K trap, which is a center table in the garden center that has yellow foliage, red foliage, maroon, and not a single deciduous plant because he'll never buy one. But I've told him, if he comes in and doesn't leave with a plant, I know it's time for me to reorder. People are in a hurry to clean up the fall garden. Don't. It is a benefit to insects, to wildlife, and it's also visually stunning when you have snow on spent flowers. If you have never left your fall garden up into spring, I highly recommend it. Both the leaves, basil leaves down low, can be a haven for insects or even rabbits or whatever you're hosting in your garden. But it also gives you something to look at, and it reminds you where not to plant something because it's right there. I mentioned evergreen ferns. We have some evergreen ferns that are native. We have some that are non-native. Won't get too deep into native versus non-native benefit versus cost. But it's very fun for me, a geeky horticulturist, to know that pittosporum on the right is native to Australia, but I'm able to grow it in Durham with snow on top. We have fantastic evergreen shrub options. This is a non-native Pieris or Andromeda. These buds are put on in late summer or fall, and those tasseled flowers hang on until spring. So all winter long, I get to enjoy the promise of spring, which is, again, that thing that makes us slow down and remember that it's not about us, but we can enjoy it while it's here. And then camellias, if you are from much farther north, camellias don't grow outside year-round. Luckily for us, we can grow both the spring flowering camellias and the fall flowering camellias and anything in between. I highly recommend starting a collection away from where you have deer pressure. We can eat camellias, so there's nothing stopping the deer. Just bear that in mind. For us, if your heart would ache if you lost your spring flowers, plant fall flowering camellias. You'll at least get some before the frosts hit. Sometimes we can get, we can just want these beautiful, big spring flowering camellia flowers to come on, and then Easter weekend. There are camellias in all colors except true yellow and blue. So you can have any number of beautiful flowers from fall through spring. This one is called Black Magic. There is also ornament in evergreen plants that when they drop their leaves, they color up. This particular plant is endemic to Alabama and one county in Texas. This is our native Croton alabamense. It's a member of the euphorbia family, so related to poinsettias and all. This thing is in full flower in March. You'll have to get close to notice it, but it's there. But meanwhile, all fall and winter, it's dropping those 3 to 5 year old leaves in that beautiful pumpkin color. Mentioned yuccas. Evergreen perennials are fantastic. I buy one expensive conifer a year. This is my partner, Chris. I buy one expensive conifer, allow myself a holiday plant every year. I highly recommend it. Don't buy Christmas trees that don't have roots on. That doesn't make any sense. And again, Izone Push. This is a Spanish fir native to northern slopes in northern Africa and southern Spain. In Durham, I grow it in a pot and give it afternoon shade. This is a small part of my conifer collection that I took to the Granville County Master Gardener Extension meeting because they wanted to talk on conifers. Just look at the textural differences that you can get in a conifer garden. And then again, close-ups. these small incremental changes that happen over winter. This is another weeping taxodium. This is supposed to be falling waters. I don't know if it is. And then our native red maple on the right. Pay attention this spring. When the maples start blooming, they're called red maples because of the color of their fruit, but this one is spectacular golden. Again, an expensive conifer every year. This is Tiny Curls White Pine, and this is my version of bonsai. My friends who do actual bonsai tell me I'm cheating, but I put dwarf conifers in pots and let them be dwarf. And then I don't have to prune because I don't like pruning. I'd rather have just the right plant. And these are our cats, Ashio and Hedjet, and they help us garden. So that is a little snippet of gardening in the Southeast. Don't take any one person's word for it, just try things and mulch. Thank you.